Another deep dive. I am so glad you could join us today because we have a truly fascinating and honestly, somewhat unsettling journey ahead of us today.
Unsettling is definitely the word for it.
Yeah, we are stepping entirely away from the typical academic papers and, clinical press releases today. Instead, we're exploring a space that is incredibly complex, deeply human, and quite frankly, often entirely hidden in the shadows.
Right into the gray market.
Exactly. We are talking about the unregulated, unauthorized world of black market erectile dysfunction medications. And to do this, we're using a very specific, incredibly detailed set of sources. We're looking at an active web page and its accompanying user forum from a platform called iMedix.
Which, if you aren't familiar with it, is this independent medical information platform. It's basically a comprehensive drug database.
Right. It's a digital hub where people go to learn about diseases, search for doctors, and critically look up specific drugs. But the mission of our deep dive today isn't just to read off a medical label or recite a sterile list of side effects to you.
No, absolutely not.
Our goal is to unpack the massive and sometimes terrifying chasm between clinical safety warnings and desperate real-world patient behavior. We are using a highly controversial, decidedly non-FDA approved drug known colloquially as Cialis Black 800 milligrams as our case study today.
It's the perfect example to look at.
It really is. Through this specific pill, we're going to explore how platforms like iMedix attempt to master the incredibly tricky discourse of patient safety, trying to balance the reality of open, unfiltered internet discussion with rigorous, harm-reducing medical moderation. Okay, let's unpack this because stepping into this specific corner of the iMedix database feels less like walking into a brightly lit, sterile clinic and much more like navigating a dimly lit, high-tech digital black market.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I have to point out for you listening, my co-host's background has completely changed today. You're sitting in front of this dimly lit, high-tech digital pharmacy grid. It's got this almost cyberpunk shadow economy vibe right from the jump, and it perfectly sets the mood for what we're about to get into.
I thought it was fitting. It really is a completely different landscape, and that atmospheric shift is crucial to understand. Because when you enter the world of unregulated, non-approved medications, you are fundamentally stepping out of the heavily regulated light of traditional medicine.
You're off the map.
Exactly. You are entering a space where the rules of pharmacology are fluid, the origins of that chemicals are completely obscure, and the physical risks are placed entirely on the shoulders of the consumer. The broader implications of self-medication in our digital age simply cannot be overstated.
Because the access is just unprecedented now, right?
Right. Today, we have unprecedented access to medical information, but simultaneously, we have unprecedented access to unverified, potentially highly dangerous substances, often available with just a few clicks. What the iMedix platform does, and what we will examine very closely, is attempt to shine a clinical, objective light into those darker corners.
They aren't pretending it doesn't exist.
No, they acknowledge that people are out there actively searching for these illicit drugs.
Right.
Rather than pretending the black market isn't there, they provide a structured space to educate the public on exactly what they might be risking.
That structural approach is fascinating, but before we get into the platform's architecture, we really need to talk about the drug itself. The enigma that is Cialis Black 800 milligrams. Looking at the source material from the iMedix database, the very first thing that jumps off the page and practically demands your attention is the dosage.
Oh, the dosage is wild.
It lists the dosage as 800 milligrams of Tadalafil, which is the active ingredient. Now, even to a layperson who casually follows medical topics, that number sounds absolutely astronomical. The text notes that the manufacturer is listed as a company called Centurion Laboratories, PVT Ltd.
Right.
But then, just a few paragraphs down in the description, the page points out that regular, genuine, higher doses of this medication are usually marketed at 80 milligrams. So we are looking at a claimed dosage that is 10 times the amount of the highest typical dose. How is that even possible? What are we actually looking at here?
What's fascinating here is the psychology of illicit pharmaceutical marketing. The truth, as the iMedix page explicitly states, is that there is no official drug called Cialis Black produced by the original manufacturer of genuine Cialis.
It's totally made up.
Completely. It simply does not exist in any legitimate medical channel. The term black, along with that massive 800 milligram number, is purely a marketing tactic. It is a fabrication used by counterfeiters or unregulated generic manufacturers designed to sound hyperpotent, elite, and extreme.
Like a secret menu item.
Exactly. It plays directly into a consumer's desire for a supercure. The consumer logic being exploited here is quite simple. If 80 milligrams is considered a strong dose, then 800 milligrams must be an unstoppable, foolproof solution.
But doesn't that fundamentally misunderstand how pharmacology works? I mean, 10 times the dose doesn't mean 10 times the effectiveness.
Precisely. In the realm of pharmacology, more does not automatically mean better. It usually means exponentially more dangerous. A medication's efficacy operates on a curve, and once you pass the therapeutic window, you are just multiplying toxicity.
Right, you're just poisoning yourself at that point.
The discrepancy in those numbers, jumping from 80 to 800, is your first massive red flag that this product exists entirely outside the bounds of clinical safety testing. It reveals that the people manufacturing and selling this are prioritizing aggressive, eye-catching marketing over any baseline concept of human biology or patient safety.
It really is all about the branding. Cialis Black just sounds like the classified version of the drug that doctors don't want you to know about. And the promises the pill makes, according to the listing, are incredibly alluring. The text says it is an effective drug extremely useful for men suffering from sexual disorders of any severity stage.
Advanced, medium, or light, doesn't matter to them.
Yeah, and it claims you only need to take it about half an hour, or 20 to 60 minutes, before sexual intercourse, and it notes that eating a heavy meal doesn't affect its absorption. But here's the real kicker. The duration of the drug's activity is listed as an astounding 35 to 36 hours.
A day and a half.
Over a day and a half of effectiveness from a single pill. I can see why that specific time frame would be a massive selling point for someone struggling with this condition.
If we connect this to the broader picture of human behavior and the immense psychological burden of erectile dysfunction, a 36-hour window is revolutionary. It completely removes the crushing anxiety of timing.
Because with other meds, you have to plan it out perfectly.
Right. With some older or different ED medications, the patient has to carefully plan their intake around a very narrow window of opportunity. That strict timetable can completely kill the spontaneity and romance of an intimate encounter, which often exacerbates the underlying performance anxiety in the first place.
It's a vicious cycle.
A 36-hour duration creates what is often colloquially referred to as the weekend pill effect. A patient can take it on a Friday evening and ostensibly not have to worry about their physiological response until Sunday morning. It offers a powerful illusion of a return to a sense of normalcy and unpressured intimacy.
But surely that extended window is a double-edged sword. If the active ingredient is in your system for 36 hours, doesn't that mean you are also locked into any potential adverse reactions for that entire weekend?
That is the exact analytical friction we need to apply here.
Yeah.
Yes, the therapeutic window is 36 hours, which means the exposure to risk is also 36 hours. If a patient experiences a severe cardiovascular event or a dangerous drug interaction on Friday night, that chemical catalyst is not leaving their bloodstream anytime soon.
It's just sitting there continuing to react.
Exactly. But the target consumer for this drug isn't thinking about the half-life of toxicity. They are focused purely on the alleviation of their immediate distress. And this is the massive, unavoidable caveat that the iMedix database highlights in stark terms. You have to contrast that immense psychological appeal with the explicit drug status listed right at the top of the page.
Not approved.
It clearly states, not approved. The allure of the 36-hour window is the shiny bait, but the unapproved, unregulated status is the hidden hook.
That brings us perfectly to the tension between the medical reality and the counterfeit shadow. Let's look at how genuine Tadalafil actually works, because the source material breaks this down very clearly before diving into the black market variant. It is designed to enhance blood flow to the penis, making it easier to achieve and maintain an erection. But the text notes that it requires sexual arousal to work. So I want to make sure I understand this. It's not just a mechanical on switch, right? How does this chemical actually trigger a 36-hour window of potential vascular response?
It is definitely not an automatic switch.
Yeah.
And understanding the mechanism is vital to understanding the risks. Tadalafil belongs to a class of drugs called PDE5 inhibitors.
PDE5.
Yes, without getting overly bogged down in the biochemistry, what this drug essentially does is block a specific enzyme PDE5 that normally breaks down a molecule responsible for relaxing smooth muscle tissue. When that breakdown is blocked, the blood vessels in specific areas of the body are able to dilate and widen much more easily, allowing for significantly increased blood flow. But, as the iMedix text correctly points out, the release of the initial molecule that starts this whole chain reaction still requires the nervous system to signal sexual arousal. It facilitates and amplifies a natural physiological process. It doesn't spontaneously generate one.
Okay, that makes sense. But obviously, when you are introducing a chemical that forcibly alters the body's blood flow and vessel dilation to that degree, there are going to be significant trade-offs. The iMedix page lists the common side effects of even the genuine regulated Tadalafil, and it's quite a list.
Yeah.
We are talking about headaches, flushing, indigestion, muscle aches, and nasal congestion.
And if you look closely, every single one of those side effects maps perfectly onto that mechanism of action we just discussed. When you take a systemic medication to dilate blood vessels, that dilation is not magically isolated to just one anatomical region.
It's everywhere.
It affects the vascular system systemically. You get headaches because the blood vessels in your cranium are expanding, altering intracranial pressure. You experience flushing because the capillaries near the surface of your skin on your face and neck are widening and filling with blood.
Ah, so it's literally just blood rushing to the surface.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nasal congestion occurs because the tiny blood vessels inside your nasal passages are swelling up, restricting the airway. Even the indigestion and muscle aches are linked to smooth muscle relaxation in the digestive tract and changes in blood flow to skeletal muscles. These are the expected common physiological trade-offs of introducing this chemical compound into the human body, even under perfectly regulated, clinically observed conditions with exact dosages.
And those are just the common ones, the ones you are supposedly expected to tolerate. The iMedix source moves on to a section labeled Serious Side Effects, and the tone shifts dramatically. This list is terrifying. We are talking about chest pain, especially during or after sex, which the text says requires immediate medical help.
It's not something you can just sleep off.
Right. Sudden vision changes or sudden hearing loss. They are very clear that if you experience either of those, you need to stop taking it and get to an emergency room immediately. And then there is the risk of a prolonged erection lasting more than 4 hours, a condition known as priapism, which the text explicitly states can cause permanent, irreversible damage to the tissue.
It is a horrifying prospect, and it underscores the sheer power of the chemical involved. Priapism isn't just an inconvenience, it is a medical emergency where oxygen-deprived blood becomes trapped, leading to tissue death. The sudden vision or hearing loss, while rare in regulated doses, indicates severe vascular disruptions to the incredibly delicate blood vessels serving the optic and auditory nerves.
Wow.
But beyond those direct side effects, the drug interactions detailed in the source material are where we start to see the true life or death implications of this medication.
Right, the interaction section is extensive. The text highlights the extreme danger of mixing tadalafil with nitrates. It seems to single that out as the most critical warning.
Because it is the most lethal. Nitrates are medications commonly prescribed for chest pain or angina. If you combine a nitrate, which is designed to quickly lower blood pressure and reduce the workload on the heart, with tadalafil, which also lowers blood pressure through systemic vasodilation, you create a compounding effect.
The bottom just drops out.
Yes, you can cause a sudden precipitous drop in blood pressure. This isn't just a matter of feeling a little faint or lightheaded. It deprives the heart and brain of oxygenated blood. It can lead to sudden cardiac arrest or a catastrophic stroke. The page also explicitly warns against combining it with alpha blockers, which are used for high blood pressure or prostate conditions, for the exact same hypotensive reason.
And it isn't just heart medication. The text notes that certain antifungal medications and certain antibiotics can cause severe issues too. How does an antibiotic interact with an ED medication?
This is a critical point about how our bodies process chemicals. The source material notes that medications like ketoconazole, an antifungal, or erythromycin, an antibiotic, can interact dangerously. These drugs inhibit the specific liver enzymes responsible for metabolizing and clearing tadalafil from your system.
So it just builds up.
Exactly. So if you take them together, your liver can't clear the ED medication. The levels of tadalafil in your blood will continue to rise, effectively leading to an accidental overdose and massively amplifying all those severe cardiovascular side effects we just discussed. Furthermore, the source makes it abundantly clear who should never be exposed to this. It is strictly unsafe for women, absolutely unsafe for children under 18, and particularly unsafe for pregnant or breastfeeding individuals, as the systemic effects are not well studied and potentially highly disruptive to fetal development.
So, to summarize the baseline here, even the genuine, perfectly manufactured, clinically dosed 80-milligram version of this drug requires intense medical oversight, careful screening of a patient's other medications, and strict adherence to dosage instructions because the baseline risks to the cardiovascular system are so incredibly high. Which brings us to the Russian roulette of the counterfeit market.
This is where it gets incredibly grim.
The iMedix page shifts its tone significantly when addressing the counterfeit Cialis Black. It goes from standard clinical warnings to raising massive red flags about the nature of the black market itself.
This raises an important question, perhaps the central question of our entire deep dive today. If the official manufacturer doesn't make a drug called Cialis Black, and you buy a pill stamped with that name from an unregulated source, what exactly are you swallowing? The iMedix warnings about this are stark, uncompromising, and absolutely necessary. They list significant cascading risks because you are dealing with unknown ingredients and completely unregulated dosages.
But practically speaking, what does that mean? Are counterfeiters really putting rat poison in these things, or is it just a weaker version of the real drug?
It spans the entire terrifying spectrum. You might be getting a pill with zero active ingredients, essentially a sugar pill made of chalk and drywall dust. Or, more dangerously, you might be getting a massive toxic overdose of an entirely different active chemical, like sildenafil, mixed haphazardly in a concrete mixer in an unregulated facility.
A concrete mixer, that's a terrifying image.
It's the reality of illicit manufacturing. Counterfeiters often use cheap, highly dangerous fillers to bind the pills together. Heavy metals, industrial paints to get that specific black color, and synthetic compounds that have never been tested for human consumption. The iMedix text explicitly warns of the potential for severe poisoning, sudden severe allergic reactions, long-term organ damage to the liver and kidneys, and acute toxicity.
And addiction, right.
Yes, it even mentions the potential for addiction, because we have to remember who is making this. An illicit manufacturer might lace a counterfeit pill with highly addictive substances to ensure repeat customers. When a patient decides to bypass the healthcare system to buy an unapproved drug like Cialis Black, they are voluntarily abandoning every single safety net, quality control measure, and clinical testing protocol that modern medicine has spent a century building. They are stepping off the map and entirely onto their own.
It is genuinely chilling when you frame it like that. We are talking about people knowingly ingesting mystery chemicals. And this perfectly sets the stage for what I consider the absolute most fascinating and frankly emotionally complex part of our source material today. We are moving from the sterile warnings to the front lines of the patient experience, the iMedix user forums.
The forums are incredibly revealing.
They really are. Below all of these dire medical warnings, the database hosts a comment section, and reading through these reviews is like conducting a real-time, unfiltered psychological study on risk, desperation, cognitive dissonance, and the human condition. It is incredibly revealing. I want to spend a very significant amount of time here reading some of these quotes and unpacking them because they bring the clinical data to life in a way nothing else can.
I think that is essential. Medical warnings are abstract concepts until you see the actual human beings who are weighing those warnings against their own personal lived struggles.
Yeah.
Analyzing the deep psychology behind these user reviews is the only way to truly understand why the counterfeit market continues to thrive, generating billions of dollars, despite the widely known and heavily publicized dangers. We have to understand the consumer to understand the market.
Let's start with a user who goes by the handle Jimrat77. He writes, "Great value for the money. The effect is really potent, but you should be prepared for some minor side effects, like headaches." When I read this, it feels like a very specific, recognizable archetype. He is treating a potentially dangerous, unapproved cardiovascular chemical like it's just another pre-workout supplement he picked up at the local nutrition store.
That is a very precise reading of that persona. I would categorize Jimrat77 as the bro science user. In certain fitness, bodybuilding, and biohacking communities, there is often an ingrained culture of intense self-experimentation.
The push through the pain mentality.
Right. There is a deeply normalized, incredibly high tolerance for physical discomfort, whether that is muscle tearing, extreme dieting, or chemical side effects, as long as it yields a desired, optimized physical result. Jimrat77 casually brushes off the minor side effects like headaches as just the standard cost of doing business. He focuses entirely on the value for the money and the potent effect.
But what strikes me is the complete absence of fear. He's taking a pill labeled 800 milligrams from an unknown lab, and his main takeaway is that it's a good bargain.
Exactly. What is glaringly missing from his review is any acknowledgement of the systemic hidden risks we just spent time detailing. He is applying basic consumer electronics logic, getting the most bang for your buck, prioritizing raw power output to a complex, potentially lethal cardiovascular medication. It shows a complete detachment from the medical reality of what he is ingesting. To him, the body is a machine to be tuned with inputs and outputs, and this pill is just another input. This mindset is incredibly dangerous because it completely ignored the invisible damage being done to the liver, the kidneys, and the vascular system until a catastrophic failure occurs.
That consumer mindset leads us to this fascinating, jarring contradiction in the practicalities of buying this drug on the black market. We have two users right next to each other on the forum who have entirely different experiences. First, we have a user named Bruce who says, the drug itself is good, the only negative is dizziness. The price is reasonable. I use these pills without any harm to my health and wallet. Besides, you can always find it in any pharmacy without any problems.
Okay.
But then, literally right next to him, we have a user named Miles who says, the advantages of this drug include the rare development of side effects. The negative sides include a high cost. So Bruce is saying it's cheap and easily accessible everywhere, and Miles is saying it's incredibly expensive. How can two people buying the same drug have completely opposite economic realities?
This specific contradiction perfectly highlights the inherently unregulated, chaotic nature of the counterfeit pharmaceutical shadow economy. Think about a regulated market. A genuine medication has a standardized supply chain, a relatively stable manufacturer's suggested retail price, and consistent availability across licensed pharmacies. You know what it costs, and you know where to get it.
It's predictable.
But with an illicit product like Cialis Black, there is absolutely no standardized supply chain. Bruce might be getting his supply from a local, geographically specific gray market supplier who imports massive, cheap batches from an overseas lab and distributes them under the counter. To Bruce, it feels ubiquitous and cheap. Miles, on the other hand, might be geographically isolated or less connected, forcing him to buy from a predatory, highly optimized online pharmacy.
Who knows he has no other options?
Exactly. That online vendor artificially inflates the price astronomically because they possess the data. They know their target demographic is desperate, embarrassed, and entirely unwilling or unable to go to a real doctor. The wildly varying experiences with price and availability are absolute, undeniable proof that these users are participating in a fragmented shadow economy.
And it makes you wonder if the price and the supplier are that different. Are they even taking the same pill?
That is the most chilling aspect of their juxtaposition. They might not even be taking the same chemical compound. Bruce's cheap pill might be entirely filler with a tiny dusting of sildenafil, causing his dizziness. Miles's expensive pill might be a massive dose of genuine Tadalafil smuggled out of a factory. They're both calling it Cialis Black, but the name is an empty vessel.
Speaking of empty vessels and massive doses, let's look at the user I call the danger seeker. This is a user named Jonathan Mason. His review is very brief. He just says, this one was good, but I had to take a higher dose. I read that, and my jaw genuinely dropped. It seems almost suicidal given the context we have.
Your reaction is entirely warranted. This is where the clinical warnings and unregulated user behavior collide in the most dangerous way imaginable. Recall our earlier discussion about the stated dosage on the iMedix page. The baseline marketing for Cialis Black is either 80 milligrams or an absurd, fabricated 800 milligrams. Even the 80 milligram dose is exponentially higher than a standard, safe medical dose. For Jonathan Mason to casually state on a public forum that he had to take a higher dose implies one of two deeply concerning, potentially lethal scenarios. Right. Either the pill is fake or his body is failing. Precisely. Scenario 1. The specific batch of counterfeit pills he purchased were incredibly weak, heavily degraded, or entirely fake. He felt nothing, so he took 2. Then 3. He is training himself to casually ingest handfuls of these black market pills to achieve an effect. The danger here is the inconsistency of the illicit supply chain.
Because the next batch might be real.
Yes. If Jonathan ever stumbles across a different batch from a different vendor that actually does contain a massive 800 milligram dose of active Tadalafil, and he takes multiple pills out of habit, he is putting himself at immediate, catastrophic risk of the severe hypotensive cardiovascular events we discussed earlier.
And what's the second scenario?
Scenario 2 is the pharmacological concept of tachyphylaxis, or rapid tolerance. He has been taking these unregulated high-dose chemicals so frequently that his vascular system has down-regulated its response. His body has adapted to the massive chemical flood, and now he requires increasingly toxic levels of the drug just to achieve a baseline physiological function. In either scenario, he is playing a literal game of Russian roulette with his cardiovascular system.
And it forces the question, why do people play that game? Why risk your heart, your vision, your life for this? We get the profound, heartbreaking answer when we look at the emotional stakes laid bare in these reviews. Listen to Qatar Ang. She writes, We were having trouble in our relationship and we were at the verge of breaking up. I was very depressed and I kept on looking for solution for my embarrassing situation. This is truly a lifesaver.
That's just raw vulnerability.
And then we have Ruth Huddleston, who reviews it from the partner's perspective, saying, the black Cialis was okay, it worked well, but not my hub's fave. And Martin Robertson, who notes he liked the 24-hour window, but didn't quite like how I felt as good on it. These aren't thrill seekers, these aren't people looking to get high, these are terrified people trying to save their marriages.
This is the tragic, highly emotional core of the entire issue. To understand the black market, you have to focus on the extreme psychological vulnerability of the patients. Erectile dysfunction carries immense, often crushing psychological and cultural stigma. It attacks a man's fundamental sense of self-worth, masculinity, and identity. And as Qatar Ang so bravely admitted at a public forum, it can create devastating silent rifts in romantic partnerships.
It tears people apart.
The intense fear of a relationship breaking down, the deep, isolating depression that accompanies that embarrassment, the feeling of fundamental inadequacy, these are incredibly powerful emotional drivers. They push rational people into corners where they're willing to take enormous irrational risks on unapproved, dangerous drugs.
Because the alternative just feels impossible to face.
Exactly. These users, the alternative, losing their life partner, or facing the perceived paralyzing humiliation of sitting in a brightly lit doctor's office and verbally admitting their dysfunction, feels vastly worse than the abstract risk of a heart attack. The counterfeiters know this intimate psychology intimately. They weaponize it. They are preying directly on that profound desperation. When they market Cialis Black 800 milligrams, they aren't just selling a chemical compound. They are selling relationship salvation. They're selling masculinity in a bottle to people who feel they have nowhere else to turn.
It adds so much devastating context to why a market for a dangerous fake drug even exists. It's an economy built entirely on shame. Now, I want to highlight one more incredible contrast in the comment section because it perfectly illustrates the bizarre nature of seeking medical advice on the internet. We have a comment from someone claiming to be a medical professional, Dr. James Bernard Jackson. He writes, and I quote, I prescribed 2 patients this particular brand, and both told it brought their Johnsons to new levels.
It's almost comical.
Right. But then, compare that supposed professional to a regular user, John Benson, who writes a lengthy, thoughtful post. He says, personally, during the years of the ED, I came to the conclusion that this problem cannot be cured with drugs alone. Sport is needed, and diet, and special exercises, and massage. It is stupid to drink pills and believe that they will help. Besides, I always say to my friends who are addicted to Cialis Black that is it dangerous to prescribe drugs by yourself? One should consult with a doctor, explaining the reason.
The irony here is so thick it is almost architectural. You have a fascinating dynamic. The unprofessional professional pitted against the voice of reason. Let's look at Dr. Jackson first. It is highly suspect, bordering on absurd, that any legitimate, licensed, board-certified doctor would actively prescribe an unapproved known counterfeit drug like Cialis Black to a patient, let alone use deeply unprofessional colloquial phrasing like brought their Johnsons to new levels in a public medical database forum.
It sounds like a bot or a vendor.
It reads entirely like a fabricated review generated by a vendor, or a highly unprofessional individual role-playing as a doctor to lend false authority to the drug.
It completely undermines the concept of medical authority on these platforms. But then you look at John Benson.
Right. Then you have John Benson, an everyday anonymous user, providing what is unequivocally the most profound, medically sound, and holistic advice on the entire page. He correctly and astutely identifies that erectile dysfunction is rarely an isolated mechanical failure. It is very often an early warning symptom of broader lifestyle, metabolic, and cardiovascular health issues.
He's advocating for real change.
He advocates for a systemic approach: diet, exercise, stress reduction, and physical therapy. Furthermore, he actively warns his peers against the severe dangers of self-prescribing black market drugs. He tells them, plainly and directly, to overcome their fear and go to a real doctor. The fact that the most responsible, evidence-based medical advice on this forum is coming from a random user, rather than the supposed doctor, perfectly encapsulates the chaotic, inverted reality of the internet's medical landscape. It shows the collapse of traditional authority and the rise of peer-to-peer medical reliance, for better or worse.
It's a complete paradigm shift in how people consume health information. And that observation segues beautifully into our final section, the iMedix ecosystem, and how a platform actually attempts to master, or at least manage, this chaotic patient safety discourse. Because as you read these wildly varying, emotionally charged comments, you start to realize there is an unsung hero working behind the scenes of this source text. the iMedix editorial team administrator. This moderator is in the trenches with these users every single day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of public health, the role of the moderator on a platform like this is a masterclass in digital health diplomacy. They have an incredibly difficult job. They aren't just acting as digital janitors, blindly deleting comments that mention unapproved drugs. They are actively engaging with the community to subtly steer them towards safety. Look closely at how they handled the alleged Dr. Jackson. They don't ban him outright, which might cause claims of censorship, but they politely and firmly smack him down.
They set him straight.
They reply, reminding him to approach discussions about medication in a professional and respectful manner, and explicitly tell him to focus on clinical medical benefits rather than using explicit language. They're establishing strict boundaries for the discourse.
And their approach to the vulnerable users is entirely different.
Vastly different. When Qatar Ang posts her highly emotional review, calling the drug a lifesaver for her failing relationship, the moderator employs deep empathy. They validate her relief first, saying it's wonderful that the medication had a positive impact on her personal life. But then they execute a gentle clinical pivot. They suggest she address underlying relationship issues alongside medical treatment for the best long-term outcomes.
They're pointing out it's a Band-Aid.
They are subtly reminding her that a black market pill is a Band-Aid, not a cure for systemic, relational, or psychological issues. And of course, they strongly and publicly validate John Benson's holistic approach, reinforcing his message to the rest of the readers. The moderator is acting as a vital voice of calm, clinical reason in an emotionally charged, highly subjective, and potentially dangerous space.
It's an incredible, nuanced balancing act. It's essentially digital harm reduction. But I have to ask a hard question here, playing devil's advocate. We see that same harm reduction philosophy reflected in the very structure of the iMedix database. The source material outlines how they categorize their information. They clearly label FDA-approved drugs like Rybelsus, Diflucan, and Amoxil with a bright green checkmark indicating safety and approval. But then they have a whole distinct section for non-FDA-approved generics, which is strictly labeled for reference only. This is where you find illicit drugs like Viagra, Lady Era, and our case study, Cialis Black, all marked with a stark red X, clearly stating not approved. My question is, why even list them? By giving Cialis Black its own dedicated detailed page on a reputable medical site, aren't they inadvertently giving it a veneer of legitimacy? Aren't they basically acting as a billboard for the drug, even with the warnings attached?
That is the crucial, defining philosophical question for any medical database operating in the internet age. Do you provide information on dangerous things, or do you scrub them from the record? Why give this poison oxygen? The answer is grounded in harsh pragmatism, because the people are already searching for it. The demand exists independent of the iMedix platform, driven entirely by the deep desperation and embarrassment we analyzed earlier. If a reputable platform like iMedix took the puritanical route and simply ignored Cialis Black, pretending it didn't exist in a vain attempt to starve it of attention, those desperate users wouldn't suddenly stop searching. They wouldn't suddenly book an appointment with a urologist.
They would just go down the search engine rabbit hole.
Precisely. They would just click on the very next link in their search results. And I can guarantee you that the next link would be a shady, illicit online pharmacy perfectly willing to sell them a bottle of rat poison disguised as medicine. That illicit site would feature zero warnings about nitrate interactions, zero warnings about precipitous blood pressure drops, and zero mention of priapism. By actively hosting the page, iMedix performs a vital interception. They capture that vulnerable searching audience. They hijack the search query. And once the user's safely on the iMedix page, the platform bombards them with critical safety warnings, exhaustive lists of lethal drug interactions, and empathetic moderation that gently pushes them back toward legitimate healthcare.
So it's about controlling the environment of the information.
Exactly. It is the digital equivalent of a safe injection site in a city. A safe injection site doesn't condone the use of illicit narcotics, but it acknowledges the cold reality that the behavior is happening regardless. It prioritizes keeping the patient alive, informed, and relatively safe over maintaining a pristine, unhelpful facade of a perfect, fully regulated world. iMedix is operating on the principle that restricting information doesn't stop dangerous behavior. It only makes that behavior exponentially more lethal.
That is a deeply profound analogy. It really is about meeting the patient exactly where they are, even if where they are is standing in a very dark, unregulated, and dangerous corner of the internet. So what does this all mean for you listening today? Let's bring all these threads together. Over the course of this deep dive, we've unpacked the incredibly powerful, almost intoxicating allure of a quick, unverified fix. We've seen how the promise of a 36-hour window of effectiveness can tempt a desperate person into playing a dangerous game with their own vascular system. We've looked at the terrifying reality of unregulated pharmaceutical black markets, where dosages like 800 milligrams are thrown around merely as aggressive marketing terms, and where the pills themselves might contain literally anything from heavy metals to massive overdoses of active chemicals. We've seen how wildly the experiences vary, proving the complete lack of a safe supply chain. Above all, this exploration underscores the absolute, non-negotiable importance of verifying exactly what you are putting into your body and intimately understanding the source and the science of your medication.
Ultimately, the most important actionable lesson we can take away from analyzing the iMedix platform and its users is that informed, critical thinking is your absolute best defense in a modern world that is completely overflowing with information, misinformation, and dangerous product overload. Platforms like iMedix exist to provide independent educational context. They act as a digital safety net. But they are not, and they explicitly state they are not, a replacement for a legitimate, honest relationship with a real medical professional. The counterfeit medical market does not thrive on the quality of its products. It thrives on consumer ignorance and, most importantly, consumer embarrassment. Education, demystification, and open, honest medical consultation are the only effective tools we have to dismantle it.
I couldn't agree more. Education is the antidote to the shadow economy. And that brings us to a final, lingering thought for you to mull over as we wrap up our discussion today. We've spent this time looking closely at the extreme, sometimes unbelievable lengths people will go to, risking the ingestion of entirely unknown chemicals, playing Russian roulette with massive, unregulated dosages, and risking severe, life-altering heart events, all just to preserve their romantic relationships and protect their own fragile self-esteem. It really makes you wonder. Is the massive, ever-growing global rise of the counterfeit medical market simply a logistical failure of law enforcement to crack down on bad actors and shut down these illicit labs? Or, far more troublingly, is it a fundamental failure of a modern healthcare system that makes men feel too deeply embarrassed, or perhaps too financially broken, to seek legitimate, safe help when they are at their absolute most vulnerable? It is a very heavy question, but it is one entirely worth considering the next time you see a miracle cure advertised online. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We deeply appreciate your curiosity and your time as we explored this complex, shadowy topic together. Until next time, stay informed, think critically, and stay safe.